Just summarize what you see some of the positives Portland has going for it. What advice would you give commercial brokers just getting into the business? For the next 10 to 20 years, what do you see happening to commercial real estate here in Maine? We'd like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat podcast. I'm your host, Greg Boulos. The Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate services firm with offices in Portland, Maine and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This is a series providing insight into Maine's real estate movers and shakers. I'd like to introduce this week's guest, Ford Reiche. Hello, Ford.
Hi, Greg.
Ford lives in Freeport with his wife, Karen. The two of them have 3 grown children, Sam, George, and Betsy. Apparently, real estate is in the blood, as Karen Reiche is a top-selling real estate broker for Landvest, where their daughter Betsy is also a broker. Their son Sam works for Leggett McCall Properties, a real estate development and advisory services firm in Boston, and their son George is in the construction business and has helped renovate a number of projects with Ford. Ford was an attorney when he first got out of college. He then co-founded Safe Handling in 1989, sorry, Ford, a rail-based shipping and logistics company established to help paper mills and other Maine industries receive bulk shipments of raw materials through the rail network. Since selling Safe Handling, Ford pursued Maine historic preservation projects, including ownership and restoration of 5 buildings on the National Registry of Historic Places. In 2008, Ford was named SBA Maine Business Person of the Year. In 2009, he was named Mainebiz Large Business Leader of the Year. And I guess you were also named Small Business Leader of the Year?
Yeah, actually, both of those were the same year. So this is how small Maine is. I was the Small Business Person of the Year in 2009 and the Large Business Leader of the Year in 2009.
Covering all the bases.
Yeah.
Also in 2009, you received the keys to the cities of Lewiston and Auburn. I guess that was quite a trophy.
That was when I sold the company. I had done one of the pleasures of having a company is that you get to be active in the community, and I'd done a lot, tried to do a lot in Lewiston, Auburn. So when I sold the company, they gave me the key to the city, and it was a nice event.
And what was that?
So for anyone else who's ever received the key to the city, I'll let you know that the large key with the ribbon on it is also a beer bottle opener.
Very, very prestigious and useful, I'm sure. And then finally, in 2010, Ford, you received the Androscoggin County Economic Development Achievement Award. Ford graduated from the University of Maine in Orono and the University of Maine Law School. Welcome, Ford.
Thanks, Greg.
Ford, I remember you telling me a story about when you were a teenager, something about driving a car and you're surprised you're still alive. I forget the details, but does that ring a bell? And maybe you could tell us about it.
Yeah, you mentioned, I don't know when I told you that story.
It was probably after a couple of beers.
It might have, sadly, this is not the only story like this, but I had just gotten my license in high school, probably 10th grade. And it was a snowstorm, and I was going across town in Falmouth to see a cheerleader and went across the Presumpscot River Bridge and broke loose on the bridge and went off the bridge into the ocean, and that's tidal there. So with 10 feet of tide, I was fortunate that the tide was out and landed in the mud flats and totaled the car.
Were you alone?
I was, but it's being a parent now, I'm more greatly appreciate the pain I put my parents through.
And I'm sure there are other stories, but we won't go into those. Ford, tell me, how do you go from being a lawyer, then a very successful businessman, to a real estate developer? Those careers all involve many different skill sets.
I guess, actually, they all involve, I think I have a basic understanding of business dynamics and how money changes hands, or how to add value. There's a lot of it that I don't understand, but that I think carries through from being an attorney to the company I started as Safe Handling, which we built to 100 employees, and then the real estate projects I've done since. And I was doing real estate deals even before I was a lawyer and all the time I was a lawyer. And I think one of the great, we owned, when I was an attorney, we always owned our real estate. And when I had the company at Safe Handling, we owned our real estate. And maybe we can talk more about this later in our discussion, but that is a great opportunity to own real estate when you can be your own tenant.
Pay yourself rent, basically.
Pay yourself rent. You might as well you're going to need the space. You might as well be paying it to amortize your own mortgage.
So what was the first property that you purchased or developed?
The first property I purchased was at the corner of Town Landing Road. My wife and I wanted to get engaged and had no money, so we bought a house for $28,000 and fixed it up and sold it for $40,000. And that was the first deal I did. The first commercial deal I ever did was your brother Joe called me about a property on Commercial Street. I was practicing law. We were in 477 Congress Street on the 4th floor, and paying rent like everybody else. And Joe called and thought that owning that property might make sense for me. Land Use Consultants was in there.
Yeah, that was 19 Commercial Street, right?
17 and 19 Commercial Street, the Working Man's Club. Land Use Consultants was a tenant on the first floor. We had an accountant, I think, on the top floor, and we went in and did all the work ourselves, gutted the first floor. It's a beautiful building. And gutted the first floor, occupied that 3,500 feet, and then we paid $330,000 for it. It was in the newspaper at the time. It was, it was a notable transaction.
Yeah. I remember it had beadboard down on the lower level.
I hung all that.
Oh, I thought that was part of the original building.
No, I drew that space, and then working nights we put all that in there, hung all the sheetrock, and did everything. Then another broker from your office came. We were only there for a year and a half or so, and a broker from your office came and had someone who wanted to do a 1031 exchange, so we sold it for $1 million and something. And
actually, I think that might have been me, because we sold it to Billy Dowd.
You sold it to Billy Dowd, yeah.
Now, you also, Ford, owned the James Bailey and the lower HHA buildings,
yeah,
located in Monument Square.
Yeah.
What attracted you to those buildings? Did you renovate them, and did you hold them very long?
We did renovate them. Northland had owned HHA, and they owned a lot of property in Portland at the time. This was still in
Northland out of Boston. Right?
Yeah, this was still in 1980s. And our law firm had grown a little bit, and we had sold this property we just described, so I had to go somewhere else. And so we bought the James Bailey building, which was a complete gut. That was four or five floors. We completely gutted that and didn't have an elevator. And the Hay building next door, right next door, had an elevator. So we bought that building and poked through to the James Bailey building, and ended up with 22,000 feet there, and that we occupied.
And did you 1031 exchange into that?
Yes.
From when you sold the Commercial Street?
Yeah.
And what was the motivation for selling that eventually?
We didn't make much money on that building. We owned it for a long time, and I think it was probably 2000 and 2007 or 8. The economy wasn't great, and there was a lot for sale in Portland at the time, and so but we just didn't have a use for it anymore, so we sold it.
And is that when you got out of the legal business at that point?
No, I got out of I only practiced law for 6 years. I was out of the practice of law in the mid 80s.
Ford, you're known for being very meticulous in your renovations. In fact, your lifelong friend, Jonathan Knowles, said, and I quote, "He doesn't shoot from the hip, and he's been consistent with that his whole life. When he gets into a project, he really is focused on it. He gets really wrapped up in it. He's very meticulous and methodical, and it's paid off for him in spades." Is that true?
Yeah, it's probably true. My lifelong friend, John Knowles, and I have got so much history on each other going back to 6th grade. That's dirty laundry. We've just defaulted into saying nice things about each other publicly.
That's probably a good strategy.
Yeah, I think it's one of the interesting things about real estate that I think fascinates you and certainly me and many other people is it's so complicated, and you have to bring so many disciplines in to play. Obviously, you need to understand finance and real estate law, and you also need to know construction. And I like construction a lot. So the point John was making, I guess, would be.
So it's more than just collecting the rent checks every month?
Yeah, definitely is. The properties, the type of real estate that Karen and I have owned has really, as you know, has been at both ends of the spectrum. Some where we've had to add a lot of value, and I think that's a lot of fun. And that's, when you're doing the construction and when it's more than just the rent check.
Right.
So we've done a lot of projects that are total renovations where a lot of value gets added. And there's really nothing in the middle part of the continuum. The other things we've invested in have been like land leases and so forth that are really just annuities. I view those as more like a financial instrument.
Like a bond.
Yep.
So you've owned, I believe, 5 properties listed on the National Historic Register. Is that correct? What are those 5 properties?
If your intended audience is people hoping to make money in real estate, I wouldn't necessarily direct them to historic properties. I owned the oldest railroad station this side of the Mississippi, and it was in Gilead, Maine, and I bought it when we started my company in Auburn in around 1990. I bought this building in Gilead, Maine for $1. It had been abandoned since the railroad stopped using it before World War II. We cut it in 4 pieces, put it on a rail car, brought it to Auburn, turned it into my office, and put it in the National Register. When I sold the company, I restored it, took it back to Gilead, gave it back to him, completely restored. Now it's the museum
In Gilead.
For Gilead. That was one. We owned a property at 765 Congress Street that we just bought, and we didn't do anything with that one. The other 4 were pretty intimate relationships I had with each of those buildings. We bought a 14,000 square foot mansion up on the Western Prom at the corner of Pine Street and the Western Prom. I'd be happy to talk about the numbers of that in a second, because that was a tax credit project. Halfway Rock Lighthouse, which is an extreme example of an historic restoration, and that was money going only one way on that project. That's not an income opportunity. And the 5th one, coincidentally, is we're having the ribbon cutting at 5:00 this afternoon for the railroad station on Main Street in Yarmouth, which is that's an income property, but was not a tax credit project.
So was that the Grand Trunk Railroad building?
Yep.
In Yarmouth?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a tiny little building.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe you purchased it and leased it to Gorham Savings Bank.
Town of Yarmouth had owned that building. The Village Improvement Society, which is a charitable organization in Yarmouth, had owned it since 1961. And they put it up for sale a year and a half ago. 75 or 100 people came to the showing. 14 people bid, and I got it on the competitive bid. And Gorham Savings Bank, they don't necessarily want to own real estate, but they want it to be there. So I'm the landlord and coached them through a beautiful historic preservation.
Did they do the work, or did you?
I spec'd it, and they did it.
They did. Speaking of renovations, you made reference to a 14,000 square foot mansion on the Western Prom. I believe that's the Charles B. Clark House.
Right.
And Clark was Portland's mayor back in 1907.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful building. And I remember about 5 years ago, you did the restoration.
Right.
Turned it into 3 apartments, huge apartments.
Right.
And what's the background on why'd you buy that? What you go through on that? And I guess you're selling off the units now. And why did you wait 5 years?
The 5 years is almost up. So that was a historic tax credit project, and it was kind of a standard. Every one of them's complicated, but this would be a typical tax credit project. We bought the building for $1 million. It's 14,000 feet, architecturally significant. It's on the National Register, and it had to be completely gutted. And 14,000 feet, no one wants a single family home that's 14,000 feet. Now one of the units is over 6,000 feet in one of the condos. We gutted it. We bought it for $1 million, gutted it, put $3 million in it, sold the tax credit for almost $1 million, and now we'll sell off the units for $4 million. So the profit there was the tax credit. It functioned the way an historic tax credit really should function. That deal would have been marginal and not worth the huge amount of work to do it if we hadn't had the tax credit, which would be all our profit.
And the tax credit, as I understand it, you get from the federal government. What is it? 20
20.
20%, and then 25% from the state?
I think that's right. We could be off by 5%. It might be 15 and 20.
And it's staggered over 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Maine is a very generous credit. It's staggered over 4 or 5 years. And they just send you a check. And what I did was we sold all of the federal credit and part of the state credit.
And did you have to wait a certain amount of time before you could sell off the units?
Yeah. So the reason in this, I don't. Lots of tax credits are gimmicks and don't really bring about the desired result. This is not the case with historic preservation tax credits, and I think most anyone would agree with me on that. But one of the benefits for the government or for the public in giving this credit is that once you get the credit, you need to leave those improvements locked in for 5 years. You cannot do anything that is at odds with the very strict rules of restoration. So, and you can't sell. Usually you would rent unless you're occupying yourself. So we've rented for 5 years, and now we'll be able to sell them.
So after 5 years, you sell the units. There's a condo association.
Right.
Can the condo association make changes to the building after 5 years?
Yes, it can. After 5 years, you can do anything.
Oh, interesting. So it's not locked in for forever.
No.
Another project you made mention of was Halfway Rock, and I think that's probably the most exciting real estate acquisition and renovation project that I've seen. And I've had the privilege of going out to Halfway Rock with you and Karen. Neil and I went out there and toured it prior to the renovation. You purchased that from the Coast Guard in 2014, and the property had been abandoned by the Coast Guard in 1975. So I assume it wasn't in the best of shape.
Oh no, there were birds living inside. The windows were all out. It was a disaster.
And people want to know Halfway Rock. Why is it called Halfway Rock?
Because it's at the mouth of Casco Bay. We live in South Freeport. It's 10 miles out to sea from there. And it's called Halfway Rock because it's halfway across the 14-mile mouth.
From Cape Elizabeth to, what's the other point?
7 miles from Halfway Rock to Cape Small in Brunswick, and 7 miles from Halfway Rock to Cape Elizabeth.
What drew you to the lighthouse? Because as you said, I'm sure that wasn't a moneymaker.
No. I sadly was armed with the tools for the job, and I appointed myself. There were 6 active bidders, and I somehow felt like I was the only one who would do justice to the place. It was an enormous undertaking, but I loved it. I loved every step of it, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet your budget was probably blown out of the water, and no pun intended.
There was not a budget. It's something you I'm sure have been in projects like that. There was a beginning and there was an end, and you have to get to the end. So I don't know what I spent.
And how long did it take you?
We worked hard at it, but kind of dubbed around. It wasn't like an all out effort for 2 summers. And then I got hired by the Discovery Channel. Gave me a bunch of dough to follow us around for them to do a TV show about it. And that summer we just thrashed, and they had 14 filming dates when they'd fly in. And so we had to have progress all along the way. And that, we got a lot of work done, and that would have been 3 summers ago.
Now I watched that on TV. It was like a 45-minute episode. It's very interesting. Where can our viewers find that?
iTunes and Amazon.
And it would be under?
You Google my name or Halfway Rock Lighthouse.
Ford Reiche or Halfway.
Grid, yeah.
Okay. So Ford, what we'll do is we'll put a link in the show notes,
Right,
so that the viewers can click on that and see it. It's certainly well worth watching.
great.
Ford, in addition to historic buildings, I know you have a strong interest in land leases. And you've talked about this a little bit before, but one of the land leases I sold you, which I think was a heck of a deal, was the land underneath the Hilton Garden Inn at the airport. Great location. What are some of the other land leases that you've been involved with?
I look at land leases and long-term stable tenants really the same. You've sold me a restaurant property that had, although that one was by surprise, lost the national tenant. But
it was
the Outback Steakhouse out by
on
the
Western
mall.
Avenue.
And they were there forever with good escalators. And then they were supposed to be there forever. And then with no notice, and this might be a lesson to everybody, they said, we're closing everything in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, or something like that. So on a Sunday night, I got a call. They said, we're letting the staff go tomorrow morning, and we'll give you the keys to the place. And so that was a piece of property that I thought, I thought that they would be there as long as it would take me to amortize the mortgage. And they came up and they were super to deal with. They wrote me a check, paid off rent that wasn't paid, but they weren't going to be there and so forth.
Then you backfilled it with a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, Mexican
restaurant.
Yeah, fine. Then I sold it to them. But other properties have been tenants that are like medical profession, which we were talking about earlier, where they just they go in for long term. And if I can get anything that's an initial term of 10 years with renewals, I figure that's good enough. You're going to amortize so much of the debt in the meantime.
You take out a 20-year mortgage, you probably paid off about half the debt or almost half the
Yeah,
debt.
what I always try to do is put down, I try to get as much money as I can in real estate and not in the stock market. But try to put enough cash in a deal so that the mortgage will be covered by the rent. So just keep it neutral. So as time
And
goes,
does that give you any return on your equity, or?
don't look for any. So I just don't want to have, when going into a deal, I try to be very conservative on each one of them.
Right.
Because when things go bad, they can all bite you at the same time. So I try not to have a lot of debt. And so I just look to have no cash flow, enough debt to be covered by the rent. And then you get 5 or 10 years out and you can refinance then. Or you wait it out and at the end of 15 or 20 years, there's no more debt. And all the rent comes to you.
Yeah. So once that debt's gone, you have ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
I always say that the secret to owning real estate is outliving your debt, because, it's true.
Yeah.
You can, if you get a competitive market, you can lower your rates and not have to worry about having that mortgage to pay.
Yeah. This is a little far in the weeds, but I'll share this for I usually amortize debt over 20 years, sometimes 15. And debt amortization is the same as income for tax purposes.
Phantom income.
Yeah. So I've got a project of 60,000-foot building we bought, and L.O. Bean is the tenant. And we're amortizing that over 10 years, thinking that's the wise thing to do. And we get hammered on taxes the first year because all that debt amortization is income. And we had to dig into our pockets to pay our income taxes.
Yeah. But you're building equity.
Building equity. And what we're going to do is do a cost segregation study. You know all about this?
Actually, we just did a cost segregation study. Saved us a ton of money in taxes.
Yeah, it's short term, but
Yeah.
I'd like to have the increased depreciation now. I don't know a great deal about. Our son Sam is doing a project here in Maine, and we're going to piggyback on that and use the same consultants from out of state.
Right.
But they basically come in, take apart a building, and say that shower stall shouldn't be amortized like real estate, and those windows won't last long. So you get a huge depreciation bump up front.
Yeah, because real estate is generally amortized for IRS purposes over 39 years. But these studies, when they do them, they'll take the doorknobs, the hinges, anything that's not really real estate, and you can amortize those over, I think, 7 years or maybe less, and it makes a big difference.
So I hope we got a bunch of doorknobs.
Yeah. Did you also do something with LL Bean or buy land from LL Bean, 20 acres for a subdivision?
Yep. We bought that building when it came with 20 acres. And this is out in Freeport. And it's beautiful property in a part of town where Freeport wants to see commercial development. It's zoned for commercial. So we did a subdivision to get to put 7 more lots in there.
Was that a while back, or is that recent?
No, it just did it. Just got approved a couple of months ago.
So Ford, when you think of real estate, is there anything that keeps you up at night?
Vacancy. It's really the only, and luckily we haven't had a lot. I've got a unit that's $6,000 a month that's vacant right now, and it's always on your mind.
They'll help offset that depreciation issue you've got up in Freeport.
Yeah, that's real money. Yeah, to stay in real estate long term, you have to have a grip on a lot of things. When you go into a deal, particularly a place like Portland is pretty stable. compared to the out, something in the back country. But you know what the market is. You can really, with some accuracy, predict what you're going to get for rents. You know what the cost of money is. You know what the cost of construction is. I view vacancy as the big wild card.
Right. And I mean, from what I can tell, Ford, virtually all your projects have been very successful. When you look at a project to buy, what goes through your mind? I mean, what tells you something's a good deal or not?
Do the math. I mean, if it requires luck or speculation, I'm probably not interested in doing anything really large, unless it's like if it's a property we have to completely rehab, then we'd have to have a picture in our mind of what it's going to look like. But when I'm looking at a piece of property, I'm always very conservative. Try to control as many things as I can.
Do you go by gut feel at all?
Yeah, I think so.
And that's worked out for you?
Yeah, I don't wing it. Try not to wing it.
Someone getting into the business today, the commercial real estate renovation or development business, what would you give them for advice?
Have someone like you who's going to make the phone ring, because it's very hard to find a commercial real estate deal if you don't have someone looking out for you. Have a bank develop a strong banking relationship. Over deliver. Tell them bad news when they haven't asked what the news is, and just let them know that you're going to spend their money wisely. And no construction and no real estate law. I think I've recommended to people in the past to get a real estate license, to take the courses, just because it gives them exposure to all the dynamics. And you have to know all that stuff to own real estate. You have to know all that stuff. Right. You can't count on lawyers and accountants to do it for you.
So looking into your crystal ball for, say, 10 years plus out, what do you see happening to commercial real estate in the Portland area?
I think Portland's different than the rest of the state.
Yeah, there's Portland and there's everything else.
It really is. I think it's fair to say that I'm not qualified to answer this question. I'll say up front, but I think a lot of people would agree with me. Portland is going to continue to be a junior version of Boston. It's going to be robust, mildly compared to Boston, but it's going to be a pretty safe, robust market. And I think, but Portland, I would not have predicted this. Karen and I both thought that Portland was going to be a tough place for our kids to work, to find a job, and there wouldn't be many young people here. And that was
changed.
Wrong completely. Outside of Portland, I'm scared to do stuff. I mean, when I see something that the numbers look good, but it's outside of Portland, I don't even look at it. And I know Lewiston Auburn very well. I love that community. But I won't invest there.
It's just a different dynamic up there.
It's a different dynamic. It's over the line. Portland's close enough to Boston in so many respects, but also geographically, it's close enough to Boston, so you're safe. And I've looked at Biddeford, and I can't. That's going to happen. I mean, that's as you know, I had a big property under option down there 5 years ago, and that's just a matter of time before that place gets good.
Yeah, Jim Brady sat in that same chair, and he's investing heavily in Biddeford and really believes that that's going to happen down there, and is happening.
Yep.
Ford, what do you see as some of Maine's greatest strengths, but also hindrances to further growth?
I think a challenge is that Maine is in a remote part of the United States, and we're not on the way to anything else. So I think we're always going to be the backyard to the metropolis. So I think that's going to be a hindrance. I think an advantage is that this is a really attractive place to live, and thankfully people are placing a higher and higher value on that. Karen sees it in residential real estate. People who have cashed out in a big way in the cities want to come here, and they still stay active in business and nonprofits and so forth, but they want to be here.
And with technology, they can do that now.
Right. And then as we were saying, now we see more and more young people coming here. I don't know enough about all this to predict that corporate offices will come to Maine, but if they did, it wouldn't surprise me. And Maine could use 20
Wexes,
home offices,
20 Unums, and
they add so
go
much to the
Betresses.
community.
Ford, as you know, over the past 10 years, we've experienced an incredibly good economy. As a result of this extended upcycle, many of our viewers have never seen a slowdown. You and I have been through a few. Can you give us an example of how bad things can get and how one of these down cycles may have affected you and some of the real estate that you own?
Yeah, I'm glad to say I've never defaulted on anything or left anyone holding the bag for anything. But anyone who's been in business as many years as I have has had close calls, and I certainly have. You I'm sure remember your folks talking about the depression, and I can as well. People who went through that they are changed for life, and I think some of the economic downturns that I've seen and you've seen changed my long term view of everything. I am vividly I recall vividly the 1980s when large banks, the large banks in Maine were the banks in Maine. And when things turned bad, they were just shutting businesses down. Family businesses had been at it for decades. Banks were shutting them down. They were being taken. Shots were being called by out-of-state banks, and then the federal
banks were going out of business.
Banks were going out of business. Recall was in. I had a real estate subdivision in Falmouth that was absolutely successful in its beginning. The bank freaked out. Was calling notes I couldn't pay. Thank God Mike Coster at another bank pulled me in there, and the project was a financial success, but just the bank freaked out. And then when I started my company, they were going to close us down for reasons that just they were unrelated to our creditworthiness. It was just we weren't meeting some formula that they required, which was part of the loan term.
Yeah, the banks panicked, and it hurt a lot of people.
The banks panicked, and the people who were doing the commercial lending in Maine were not big shots in those big banks. I was with Andrew Scoggins Savings, had a wonderful relationship with them when my company was in Lewiston, Auburn for 20 years. And in the past 15 years or so, I've been with Gorham Savings Bank. And, those are personal relationships, and that's a completely different type of bank. These, as you probably know, these small banks have a deep commitment to community. They do stuff, and they do things and don't advertise it. They are very actively involved in their communities.
For of all the redevelopments you've done, what's your favorite?
I think the first deals you ever do are the ones you are the fondest of. Maybe the one we talked about first, the Working Man's Club on Commercial Street. I wish and everyone says this, I'm sure. You wish you'd sold nothing, right? And kept it all.
Right.
And I think that holds true for almost everything.
I would have thought you would have said the lighthouse.
It might be. But that's a completely different department than commercial real estate.
Yeah, that was a passion.
Mm-hmm.
What about your least favorite redevelopment?
Thankfully, the only deal I think I've ever lost money on was, maybe twice. Small money, like $5,000 or $10,000. I lost on a couple apartment residential rentals.
You only lost $5,000 or $10,000?
Yeah, but the work and
you've led a blessed life for it.
I know. Hey, but what you go through, the torture and abuse you take from being a certain type of residential landlord is particularly in earlier times.
That's why you hire a property management firm.
Yeah, or that's why you don't do it.
Are you still actively buying real estate, or are you content to manage what you've got?
I've said no to a couple things recently, and I didn't know why. I'm not. I'll get back into it.
Are you concerned about the economic future?
Yeah, I mean, you can't pay the prices that people want right now. But that isn't. You can't pay the prices that people want right now for a product that's going to remain the same product. So often we'll buy something and gut it and redo it.
Right.
That I don't care what that's a completely different equation than what the market prices are.
Looking back over your career, are there any properties that you had the opportunity to buy and you passed on and you're kind of kicking yourself now, or do you not even think about that?
No, I don't. I'm philosophical about it. You have to be. You make mistakes all the time, and Wish things could be different all the time, and that's just showbiz. There is, there is one property that Karen brings up all the time that we didn't buy, and it was one you showed us, right by the Regency Hotel on Market Street.
I remember.
Milk and Market.
I was on vacation when you called me and said
I didn't call
you're not going to go through with the contract.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but Karen called you and said she wanted. This was Milk and Market Street.
Oh, yeah. Yep. It was a wooden building, right?
Yeah, wooden building, and it was just it's deferred maintenance and lots of tenants. And Karen wanted it because she wanted something in that part of town. I was on the roof looking at the roof. Rick Casada owns the building next door. He phoned me. He phoned me for the roof. He said, "Get out of this part of town," because it was a historic structure, and there can be certain complications. But anyway, I just, for other reasons, decided not to buy the building.
Yeah, not to make you feel bad. That's worth $1 billion now.
I know. If it's still got more tenants than I want to deal with.
If you had to do it all over again, what, if anything, real estate wise, would you have done differently?
I don't. Might have tried more aggressively to buy property. We've always had a deal going and always owned property. Probably would have been more systematic about lots of it, owning lots of it, making it. I've just never been my job. It's always been secondary to something I was doing. One thing I would do differently, but you have to live through your youth to learn this lesson, or at least I did. I wouldn't be a hard ass in a real estate deal. About 30 years or so ago, I just started trying to make every deal I did be a super professional deal. Mm-hmm. Try to over deliver for the banks, try to be very detail oriented for a buyer or a seller, whoever's across the table from me, and try to make each transaction as pleasant as possible. When I was young and just learning how to be an attorney and flexing muscles and not knowing what you're doing, I was a hard ass a couple times and regretted it. Because I was up against people who were a lot tougher than I was. And I just have learned, if you approach a deal like a complete human and willing to give, it comes back. It really comes back in spades.
Well, all the years I've known you, I've never known you to be difficult to work with.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, just the opposite. A real gentleman.
Thanks. Well, hopefully that's the case.
It is. Absolutely. Well, that's it for the Boulos beat this week. Special thanks to Ford Reiche for being my guest.
It's always fun with you, Greg.
I'd like to thank you for listening today. And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and LinkedIn, and at The Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter. And lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. Just be sure to outlive your debt.